You have probably heard it before, that nagging feeling that something is off, that subtle shift in her voice, the way she avoids certain topics, the distance that seems to grow even when she is sitting right next to you. You may have dismissed it as your imagination, told yourself that you were overthinking, that every relationship has its ups and downs. But what if the words she has been using were telling you everything you needed to know? What if the phrases she has been repeating were actually subtle confessions, unintentional revelations of a reality she has been trying so hard to hide? Did you know that women involved in secret relationships often reveal subtle signs without even realizing they are doing it? In many situations, the words they use during ordinary conversations can unintentionally expose what they are trying so hard to hide. And if you have been paying attention, you may have already heard them. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus taught that we should not be disturbed by events, but by our judgments about them. When it comes to relationships, the event is the change in her behavior. The judgment is what you make of it. If you are not paying attention to the words she uses, you are missing the clearest signals she is sending. Infidelity in a marriage or committed relationship rarely happens completely without warning. Most of the time, it develops through complicated psychological processes that gradually build over time. At the same time, language often reveals what is happening inside a person's mind. When a woman is emotionally involved in two relationships at the same time, her subconscious is constantly attempting to balance two conflicting realities. On one side is her official relationship with her partner, while on the other is the hidden relationship she is trying to keep secret. In psychology, this internal conflict is often described as cognitive tension, a form of mental pressure that can cause certain words or expressions to come out unintentionally. The philosopher Seneca wrote that the mind is never more active than when it is trying to hide something. And that activity, that constant effort to maintain two realities, leaks out in the words she chooses. Have you ever noticed your partner saying something that sounded strange or unlike the way she normally talks? Stay with this, because what you are about to discover could completely change how you interpret behaviors you have always overlooked. The first phrase you may hear is, "I feel like you do not really understand me anymore," or "You do not know me the way you used to." Although these words may simply sound painful, they can often carry a much deeper emotional meaning than what appears on the surface. In some situations, they may reflect the feeling that someone else understands them on a deeper level. When these statements begin appearing repeatedly, there is a strong possibility that they are unconsciously comparing their current relationship with another emotional connection. If another relationship begins to feel more emotionally satisfying, these phrases can slowly become a way of justifying that situation in their own mind. As they convince themselves that you have changed from the person you used to be, looking somewhere else for those missing emotional needs gradually begins to feel acceptable within their subconscious. Eventually, some of the responsibility appears to shift toward you, leaving you questioning yourself and wondering what you did wrong. Yet the reality is often much more complicated than it initially seems. The Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius wrote that the soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. When a woman is involved in a secret relationship, her thoughts are colored by the need to justify her actions to herself. She must convince herself that her primary relationship is lacking, that she is not being understood, that her emotional needs are not being met. And those thoughts leak out in the words she uses. When she tells you that you do not understand her anymore, she is not just making an observation. She is building a narrative that allows her to feel justified in seeking connection elsewhere. This is not necessarily conscious. It is a psychological defense mechanism, a way of reducing the cognitive dissonance that comes with being emotionally involved in two relationships at once. The philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche, whose work on human psychology was remarkably prescient, observed that we often lie to ourselves more than we lie to others. And when a woman tells you that you do not understand her, she may be lying to herself as much as she is lying to you. The second phrase is, "I need some space," or "I just want some time to myself." When a woman involved in a secret relationship says this repeatedly, it does not necessarily mean she is trying to distance herself from everyone around her. More often, she may specifically be creating distance from you, so she has more room to manage other areas of her life. On the surface, it may simply appear to be a healthy desire for privacy or independence. However, in many situations, it can also create opportunities to spend time connecting with someone else. This is why paying attention to the small details that people often overlook becomes so important. If she keeps saying that she needs personal space, while remaining highly active on social media, frequently going out, meeting friends, and maintaining a busy social schedule, then it is probably not genuine solitude that she is searching for. What has actually changed is the amount of closeness she wants with you. Someone who genuinely needs personal space will usually spend that time reflecting, reconnecting with themselves, restoring emotional balance, or focusing on personal growth. But when another romantic relationship becomes part of the picture, the desire to remain socially active often stays exactly the same. Instead, it is the primary relationship that slowly begins receiving less attention. Another detail worth paying attention to is when this request first begins appearing. Quite often it starts after moments of deep emotional closeness or intense intimacy. Those experiences can trigger feelings of guilt, causing the person to create emotional distance as a way of reducing the psychological pressure they are experiencing. The philosopher Epictetus taught that we should not be upset by what we do not have, but rejoice in what we do. But when a woman is pulling away, she is not rejoicing. She is escaping, and the space she is asking for is not about self-care. It is about creating room for someone else. Now we come to the third phrase, and this is one that deserves especially careful attention. The third statement usually sounds completely reasonable and convincing. It is something like, "This has nothing to do with you," or "It is not about you." These words often appear when you begin noticing changes in her behavior and try to understand what is really going on. Instead of receiving an honest explanation, you are simply reassured that whatever is happening has nothing to do with you. Yet, in a close relationship, almost every emotional change eventually affects both partners in one way or another. When someone repeatedly insists that their problem is not connected to you, it can sometimes be a way of avoiding questions they do not want to answer. The hidden message behind the statement is often, "Please do not look any deeper into this." Many men do not realize that this phrase is frequently accompanied by noticeable emotional changes caused by another relationship. She may become emotionally distant, show less affection, or behave differently from the way she once did. When you notice these changes and ask what is wrong, it is much easier for her to give you an explanation that keeps you from reaching the real issue. From a psychological perspective, what is especially interesting is that she may genuinely believe she is protecting you from unnecessary pain by saying these words. In reality, however, those reassurances may keep you from understanding what is truly happening within your relationship. The philosopher Seneca wrote that we should not be ashamed to learn what we do not know. But when a woman tells you that it is not about you, she is discouraging you from learning. She is telling you to stop asking questions, and that should make you ask more. When someone tells you not to look deeper, it is usually because there is something to find. The fourth phrase is one of the most difficult to identify because it sounds completely reasonable and very easy to believe. It usually sounds something like, "I am going through a difficult time," or "I have a lot on my mind lately." This explanation is one of the most common forms of emotional justification. When you hear words like these, your natural response is usually to be compassionate and understanding. Because of that, you may avoid asking further questions, believing that you should not add more stress to everything they are already dealing with. But that is exactly where the problem can begin. A person who is genuinely struggling emotionally will often turn toward their partner for comfort, reassurance, and emotional support. However, in many situations involving infidelity, phrases like these can become a convenient explanation for the emotional distance that is slowly developing. The philosopher Marcus Aurelius wrote that we should waste no time arguing about what a good man should be. Be one. And when you are in a relationship, being a good man means being attentive, being present, being willing to ask the hard questions. When a woman tells you that she is going through a difficult time, it is natural to want to give her space. But if that difficult time stretches on indefinitely, if her emotional distance becomes permanent, if she never seems to want to reconnect, then something else is happening. She is not just going through a difficult time. She is going through a difficult time with someone else. The philosopher Epictetus taught that we should not be disturbed by events, but by our judgments about them. The event is that she is pulling away. The judgment is that she just needs time. But if you ignore the pattern, you are not being understanding. You are being naive. The fifth phrase is often the one that can be the most revealing, especially when it begins appearing alongside several of the other changes we have already discussed. It usually sounds something like, "I do not want to argue right now," or "I just do not have the energy to talk about this." On the surface, these words may seem completely normal. Everyone experiences moments when they do not want to argue or deal with difficult conversations. But when this response becomes a repeated pattern, it may be pointing towards something deeper. When someone is emotionally divided between two relationships, difficult conversations can create an uncomfortable amount of psychological pressure. Instead of addressing the real reason behind the emotional distance, avoiding the conversation can become an easier way to escape that pressure. The less she has to explain, the fewer questions she has to answer, and the easier it becomes to keep certain parts of her life separated. Pay close attention to what happens after she says this. Does she eventually come back and talk about the issue? Does she try to repair the emotional connection between you? Or does the conversation simply disappear while the distance between you continues growing? These details can be much more important than the phrase itself. Someone who genuinely needs time to calm down will usually return to the conversation once they have had an opportunity to process their emotions. They may still be uncomfortable, but they will usually want to find a solution. However, when avoiding difficult conversations becomes a regular habit, it can sometimes indicate that there is something else happening beneath the surface. The philosopher Seneca wrote that the greatest cure for the mind is trust in the one who is advising. But when a woman consistently refuses to engage in difficult conversations, she is not trusting you with her truth. She is protecting a secret. Another phrase that can appear in these situations is, "You are overthinking everything," or "You are just imagining things." This statement can be especially confusing because it immediately makes you question your own judgment. Instead of discussing the changes you have noticed, the focus suddenly shifts toward whether you are being too suspicious. Of course, there are situations where someone genuinely may be overthinking or misunderstanding what is happening. That is why a single phrase should never be treated as proof of anything. What matters is the overall pattern of behavior. If communication has changed, affection has decreased, unexplained distance has appeared, and your concerns are repeatedly dismissed without a meaningful conversation, then it is worth paying attention to the bigger picture. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus taught that we should not be upset by what we do not have, but rejoice in what we do. And when you are in a relationship, what you have is a partnership built on trust, honesty, and communication. When those things begin to erode, when the words she uses start to sound like excuses, when the distance grows and the explanations become vague, you are not imagining things. You are noticing what is right in front of you. The challenge is not in seeing the signs. The challenge is in believing them. The philosopher Marcus Aurelius wrote that everything we hear is an opinion, not a fact. Everything we see is a perspective, not the truth. And when a woman tells you that nothing is wrong, that is her opinion. But if her behavior tells a different story, you have to decide whose words you are going to trust. If you have heard any of these phrases and felt that something was off, trust that feeling. Not because you are paranoid, but because you are paying attention. The Stoics understood that the mind has a way of protecting itself from uncomfortable truths. They also understood that true wisdom comes from seeing things as they are, not as we wish them to be. When you notice these phrases, do not ignore them. Do not dismiss them. Do not convince yourself that you are overthinking. Instead, observe, reflect, and act. Not from anger, not from accusation, but from clarity. The truth is not always easy to see, but it is always there, waiting for you to look a little closer. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it.